The sky wept on the day we buried Michael. Rain pattered against my black umbrella as I stood before the fresh grave, my legs threatening to give way beneath me. "Mrs. Thompson?" I turned to see a man in a crisp suit, his expression professionally sympathetic. "I'm James Anderson from Anderson and Partners," he said, extending a business card. "Your husband left instructions to contact you after his passing." A will. Michael had made a will? In the blur of grief following the accident, this was the first thing that had penetrated the fog in my mind. Dad squeezed my hand from his wheelchair beside me, his weathered face lined with concern. "We should go," he murmured. "You're soaked through." I nodded numbly, turning away from the grave that now held my husband of just 3 years. As I helped Dad into our car, I noticed a sleek black sedan parked across the cemetery. Even through the rain-streaked windows, I could make out 2 familiar silhouettes. Karen and Emily, my mother-in-law and sister-in-law, watching from a distance. They hadn't even bothered to attend the service. A chill ran through me that had nothing to do with my rain-damp clothes. "They're going to try to take everything," I whispered, a sudden clarity cutting through my grief. Dad's eyes hardened as he followed my gaze. "Over my dead body, sweetheart." Little did I know how right I was, or how prepared Michael had been for exactly this scenario. I was 12 when I first learned how quickly life could change. The sound of Grandma's muffled sobs from the kitchen still echoes in my memory sometimes. A rainy Tuesday evening. A drunk driver. Mom died on impact. Dad survived, but his legs were crushed. "Chloe," he had croaked from the hospital bed, reaching for my small hand. "I'm so sorry, sweetie. I'm so sorry." For years, I didn't understand why he apologized. It wasn't until I was older that I realized he was apologizing for what our lives had become, for the struggles ahead, for the mother I'd lost, for the father he thought he could no longer be. But my dad, Mark Smith, was made of stronger stuff than he gave himself credit for. Once he was out of the hospital and settled into his wheelchair, he channeled all his energy into his work as an editor at the city's major newspaper. "Your dad's a fighter," our neighbor Mrs. Reynolds once told me as she watched him maneuver his wheelchair up our modified ramp. "Got more determination in his little finger than most folks have in their whole body." I would nod, pride swelling in my chest. Because she was right. Dad made sure I had everything I needed, encouraged me to join clubs, make friends, have as normal a life as possible. But the truth was, I preferred spending time with him. We'd watch old movies together, argue about books, and he'd help me with my homework. When college acceptance letters arrived, Dad insisted I go away to school. "You need to spread your wings, kiddo," he said, the resolve in his eyes brooking no argument. "Don't worry about me. I'll be fine." I was hesitant, but I knew he was right. So off I went to State University, majoring in accounting. It was at university that I met Jessica, who would become my best friend. And through Jessica, I met her second cousin Michael. The first time I saw him, he was arguing passionately about some obscure rock band with another student in the campus coffee shop. His hands moved animatedly as he spoke, his eyes alive with enthusiasm. "That's my cousin," Jessica had whispered. "He's intense about things he loves. Wait till you meet him." Michael was kind, funny, and he didn't bat an eye when I told him about my dad. In fact, the first time he met Dad, they hit it off immediately, bonding over their shared love of classic rock. "Your old man's cool," Michael told me later, his arm draped casually around my shoulders. "And you're pretty amazing for taking care of him all these years." I shrugged it off, but inside, I was glowing. For the first time since the accident, I felt like maybe, just maybe, I could have a normal life. A life with love, laughter, and yes, even a family of my own someday. After graduation, life seemed to fall into place like pieces of a puzzle. I landed a job at the local tax service, and Michael started working as a long-haul truck driver. We dated for 2 years before he proposed on a crisp autumn evening in the park where we had our first date. I was over the moon, but there was one thing I needed to make clear. "Yes, Michael, but I can't leave my dad," I said, my voice firm despite the tears of joy. "He needs me." Michael's face broke into a wide grin. "I wouldn't have it any other way," he said, pulling me close. "We'll all live together." Your dad's apartment is big enough for the three of us, right? The wedding was small but beautiful. Dad insisted on wheeling himself down the aisle to give me away. There wasn't a dry eye in the house. As I stood there hand in hand with Michael, I felt like I was living a fairy tale. If only I'd known then that every fairy tale has its villains. My first meeting with Michael's mother and sister should have been a warning sign. So your father is handicapped? Karen had asked, her nose wrinkling as if she'd smelled something unpleasant. He's disabled, I corrected, trying to keep my tone neutral. But he works as an editor and, how nice, she interrupted, clearly uninterested. Michael darling, are you sure about this? There are so many nice girls from good families. The implication hung in the air like a noxious cloud. I felt my face burn with anger and shame. Michael, bless him, immediately jumped to my defense. Mom, Chloe is from a good family, he said, his voice sharper than I'd ever heard it. Her dad's disability doesn't change that. I love her, and that's all that matters. That shut Karen up, but I could see the disapproval lingering in her eyes. Emily, taking cues from her mother, was equally cold towards me. Later, Michael apologized profusely. They've always been like this, he confessed as we drove home. Ever since Dad left, Mom's been obsessed with appearances and status. She raised Emily to be the same way. I glanced at him, surprised by this revelation. Your dad left? Michael nodded, his knuckles whitening on the steering wheel. When I was 10. He ran off with his secretary, total cliché. Mom was devastated, but instead of healing, she became, well, what you saw today. Everything became about keeping up appearances, making sure everyone knew the Thompsons were still equality people, despite being abandoned. This insight into Karen's behavior didn't excuse it, but it helped me understand the twisted lens through which she viewed the world. A world where a disabled father-in-law was a stain on her family's carefully curated image. After the wedding, true to his word, Michael moved in with Dad and me. Our life fell into a comfortable routine. I'd go to work at the tax office, Michael would be on the road for days at a time, and when he was home, we'd all have dinner together. But whenever Karen and Emily visited, the atmosphere in our home changed. They'd strut around like they owned the place, barely acknowledging Dad's presence. Once, I overheard Karen muttering to Emily, "It's a shame. Michael could have done so much better. Now he's stuck with this girl and her crippled father. What if they have children? Can you imagine the genes?" I was furious but bit my tongue for Michael's sake. I tried to keep the peace, but it was getting harder and harder. As the months passed, Michael's trucking business began to flourish. He was always on the road, crisscrossing the country in his big rig. I missed him terribly when he was gone, but I threw myself into my work at the tax office and spent my evenings keeping Dad company. One crisp autumn evening, as I was helping Dad into bed, Michael called, his voice crackling with excitement over the phone. "Chloe, I've been thinking," he said. "How would you feel about buying a townhouse? It would be easier for your dad to move around in a wheelchair. He could spend more time outside. Plus, you could have a garden, something to keep you busy when I'm on the road." The more he talked, the more I warmed to the idea. I glanced at Dad, who was pretending not to eavesdrop. "What do you think, Dad?" I asked, putting the phone on speaker. Dad's eyes lit up. "A garden would be nice," he admitted. "And it would be easier to get outside." That settled it. Over the next few weeks, we threw ourselves into house hunting. We finally found the perfect place, a spacious townhouse with wide doorways, a roll-in shower for Dad, and a beautiful backyard. Taking out a mortgage was scary, but with Michael's income and mine, plus the rent from Dad's old apartment, we managed to make it work. We moved in on a sunny Saturday in spring, and I'll never forget the look on Dad's face as he wheeled himself out onto our new patio. "This is perfect, sweetie," he said, his eyes misty. "Thank you." We spent the next few months settling in, making the place our own. I planted a small vegetable garden, and Dad would sit outside for hours, soaking up the sun and fresh air. It was idyllic. Then came the housewarming party. We invited friends, colleagues, and yes, Karen and Emily to our housewarming. The party was in full swing when they arrived, fashionably late as usual. They sauntered in, eyeing everything with barely concealed envy. As we moved through the house, I could see the wheels turning in Karen's head. When we reached the master bedroom, she turned to me with a sly smile. "You know, Chloe," she said, her voice low, "this would be perfect for Michael and me. Why don't you send your father to a nursing home? Then I could move in here." I felt like I'd been slapped. "Excuse me?" "Oh, don't look so shocked," Karen continued. "Your father isn't well. He's not a whole person anymore, is he? He doesn't need all this luxury. A nursing home would be more than enough for someone in his condition." Her words hit me like physical blows, each one striking at my deepest insecurities. Not a whole person. The phrase echoed in my mind, reminding me of every sideways glance, every whispered comment I'd endured growing up with a disabled father. Before I could respond, Karen marched out to the patio where Dad was chatting with some guests. To my horror, she grabbed the handles of his wheelchair and started pushing him towards the driveway. "Karen!" I shouted, running after her. "What are you doing?" "If he won't go to a nursing home, he can stay outside," she sneered. "That's what you wanted, isn't it? For him to be outdoors?" I was shaking with rage and disbelief. Thankfully, Michael had heard the commotion and came running. His face turned red with anger when he saw what his mother was doing. "Mom," he bellowed, "what the hell are you doing? Let go of Mark's chair right now." Karen looked shocked at Michael's tone. "But honey, I don't want to hear it," Michael cut her off. "You and Emily need to leave. Now." After they left, Michael apologized profusely to Dad and me. "I'm so sorry," he said, his voice breaking. "I had no idea she would. I'm just so sorry." Dad reached out and patted Michael's hand. "It's not your fault, son. Some people, they just can't understand." That night, as Michael and I lay in bed, I could feel the tension in his body. "I've been too passive with them," he whispered in the darkness. "Too willing to excuse their behavior because they're family. But what she did today." He trailed off, his voice thick with emotion. I rolled over to face him, tracing the worry lines on his forehead. "It's okay," I murmured, though we both knew it wasn't. "No, it's not," he said firmly. "I'm going to make sure they never hurt you or your dad again. I promise." I didn't know then what he meant by that promise. Or how soon he would be taken from us. Life settled into a new rhythm after the housewarming incident. Karen and Emily kept their distance, which suited me just fine. Michael threw himself into his work, taking on more long-haul routes to help cover our new mortgage. I split my time between my job at the tax office and tending to our home and Dad. 2 years passed in the blink of an eye. Our life fell into a comfortable routine. Michael was on the road more often than not, but when he was home, our little family was happy. Dad's health was stable, and he seemed content spending his days in the garden or working on his editing from home. Then came the call that shattered my world. I was at work when my phone rang. An unfamiliar male voice greeted me. "Mrs. Thompson? This is Officer Rodriguez from the Highway Patrol." My heart dropped into my stomach. "Yes," I managed to squeak out. "I'm sorry to inform you that your husband, Michael Thompson, has been in a serious accident." The rest of the conversation was a blur. Words like head-on collision and didn't make it floated around me, but I couldn't process them. It wasn't until I heard myself thanking the officer and hanging up that reality began to sink in. Michael was gone. The drive home from work that day remains a blank spot in my memory. I remember only fragments, the sound of gravel crunching under my tires as I pulled into our driveway, the weight of my keys in my hand, the way Dad's face crumpled when he saw my expression. "Chloe," he asked, his voice small and afraid. "What's wrong?" I opened my mouth to tell him, but no sound came out. Instead, I sank to my knees beside his wheelchair, buried my face in his lap, and sobbed like I hadn't since I was 12 years old. Dad stroked my hair, silent tears rolling down his weathered cheeks. We stayed like that for hours, grief binding us together as it had once before. As we pulled into our driveway after the funeral, something seemed off. The lights were on in the house, which was strange because I was sure I turned everything off before we left. Did you leave any lights on, Dad? I asked, frowning. He shook his head. No, I don't think so. As we got closer, I could see movement inside the house. My heart started racing. Were we being robbed on the day of Michael's funeral, no less? I helped Dad out of the car and into his wheelchair, my mind racing. Should I call the police? But as we approached the front door, I heard familiar voices inside. My blood ran cold as I recognized them. I pushed open the door to find Karen and Emily in our living room, surrounded by boxes and pieces of furniture. What the hell is going on here? I demanded, my grief momentarily forgotten in the face of this outrageous intrusion. Karen turned to me, her face a mask of false sympathy. Oh, Chloe, dear, she cooed, we're just helping you pack up. After all, you can't possibly afford to keep this place now that Michael's gone. I was speechless. Emily chimed in, her voice sickeningly sweet. Don't worry. You can go back to your father's apartment. It's cozy. I could feel the rage building inside me. Get out, I said, my voice low and dangerous. Get out of my house right now. Karen had the audacity to look offended. This house belongs to us now. All of Michael's property does. We're his family, after all. Like hell you are. I exploded. Where were you today at his funeral? Oh, that's right. You couldn't be bothered to show up. Karen waved her hand dismissively. We were busy making arrangements. Now, be a good girl and start packing. We'll need you out by tomorrow. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. These women hadn't shed a tear for Michael, hadn't even attended his funeral, and now they were trying to kick us out of our home. I'm calling the police, I said, pulling out my phone. Karen and Emily exchanged worried glances. They clearly hadn't expected me to fight back. Now, Chloe, Karen began, but I cut her off. No. You have exactly 5 minutes to get out of my house before I call the cops. This is my home. Michael and I bought it together. You have no right to be here. Maybe it was the steel in my voice or the fire in my eyes, but Karen and Emily finally seemed to realize they'd gone too far. They gathered their things and left, but not before Karen turned to me with a sneer. This isn't over, Chloe. You'll be hearing from our lawyers. As I closed the door behind them, the adrenaline that had kept me upright drained away. I slumped against the wall, sliding down until I sat on the floor. Dad wheeled over to me, his face a mix of concern and pride. You stood up to them, he said softly. I nodded, too exhausted to speak. Michael would have been proud, Dad continued, reaching out to squeeze my shoulder. And so am I. His words were like a balm to my raw soul. For the first time since receiving that terrible phone call, I felt a flicker of strength returning. We would get through this. Somehow. A week after the funeral, I received a call from a local law firm. My heart raced as I answered, fearing it was Karen making good on her threat of legal action. Mrs. Thompson, a crisp, professional voice asked. This is James Anderson from Anderson and Partners. I'm calling regarding your late husband's will. I felt a glimmer of hope. His will. I didn't know he had one. Yes, ma'am. Mr. Thompson came to see us about 6 months ago. He asked that we contact you in the event of his passing. I scheduled an appointment for the next day, my mind reeling. Why hadn't Michael told me about this? What did it mean? That night, I barely slept. I kept thinking about the last 6 months of our marriage, searching for signs that Michael had been preparing for the worst. Had he seemed different? More serious? More contemplative? In retrospect, there had been small changes, his insistence on taking out extra life insurance, his sudden interest in our financial paperwork, his quiet moments staring out at the garden when he thought I wasn't looking. He knew, I realized with a chill. Somehow, he knew his time was running out. The next morning, I wheeled Dad into Mr. Anderson's office. The lawyer greeted us warmly, his kind eyes crinkling at the corners. Mrs. Thompson, Mr. Smith, thank you for coming in, he said, gesturing for us to settle near his desk. I'm sorry for your loss. Mr. Anderson opened a file on his desk. Now, as I mentioned on the phone, your husband came to see us to draft his will. He was very clear about his wishes. I held my breath as Mr. Anderson began to read. I, Michael Thompson, being of sound mind, do hereby bequeath all my worldly possessions to my beloved wife, Chloe Thompson. I gasped. Dad's grip on my hand tightened. Mr. Anderson continued, this includes our home, my truck, and all our savings. It is my wish that Chloe use these resources to care for herself and her father, Mark Smith, whom I have come to love as my own. Tears were streaming down my face now. Even from beyond the grave, Michael was taking care of us. There's more, Mr. Anderson said gently. Mr. Thompson left a letter for you. He handed me an envelope. With shaking hands, I opened it and began to read. My dearest Chloe, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone. I'm so sorry for leaving you and Mark. Please know that you two were the best thing that ever happened to me. I made this will because I know how my mother and sister can be. I didn't want to worry you, but I needed to make sure you and Mark were protected if anything happened to me. You're my real family, Chloe. You and Mark, not them. Take care of each other. Live your lives to the fullest, and know that I'll always be watching over you. All my love, Michael. I clutched the letter to my chest, sobbing. Dad was crying too, his weathered hand patting my arm. Mr. Anderson gave us a moment before speaking again. Mrs. Thompson, there's one more thing. Your husband's truck was insured. Given the circumstances of the accident, the insurance company will be paying out the full value of the policy. I looked up, sniffling. What does that mean? It means, Mr. Anderson said with a small smile, that you'll be receiving a substantial sum. Enough to pay off your mortgage and then some. As we left the lawyer's office, I felt like a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. We were going to be okay. Michael had made sure of it. As we pulled into our driveway, I noticed a familiar car parked on the street. My heart sank as I recognized Karen's sleek sedan. Oh no. I muttered. What now? Sure enough, Karen and Emily were waiting on our front porch. But this time, I wasn't afraid. I had Michael's letter in my pocket and the strength of his love in my heart. Chloe, Karen began as we approached, her voice sickly sweet, we need to talk about Michael's estate. I stood tall, looking her straight in the eye. No, Karen, we don't. Michael left everything to me. It's all legal and official. And do you want to know why? Because we were his real family, not you. Now, please leave. You're trespassing on my property. For once, Karen was speechless. Emily tugged at her arm, whispering urgently. With one last venomous glare, they got in their car and drove away. I watched them go, a strange sense of peace settling over me. The threat they had represented was neutralized. Michael had seen to that. As Dad and I entered our home, secure and safe, I felt Michael's presence around us like a protective shield. He really did think of everything, didn't he? Dad mused as I helped him into his favorite spot by the window. I nodded, my throat tight with emotion. That was Michael, I said softly. Always looking out for us. The weeks following our meeting with the lawyer were a whirlwind of activity. I threw myself into settling Michael's affairs, grateful for the distraction from my grief. The insurance payout came through, and true to Mr. Anderson's word, it was enough to pay off our mortgage with plenty left over. One afternoon, as I was going through Michael's desk, I came across a small notebook. Curious, I opened it and found pages filled with his messy scrawl. It was a journal of sorts, filled with his thoughts and plans for our future. Thinking about starting a college fund for our future kids, one entry read. Want to make sure they have the best start in life. My heart clenched. We had talked about having children someday but had decided to wait until we were more financially stable. Now, reading Michael's private hopes and dreams, I felt a fresh wave of grief wash over me. Oh, Michael, I whispered, clutching the notebook to my chest. We had so many plans. That night, I tossed and turned, unable to sleep. My mind kept drifting to the journal, to the future we'd never have. When I finally drifted off, I dreamed of Michael. He was smiling, holding out his hand to me. It's okay, Chloe, he said in my dream. Everything's going to be all right. I woke up the next morning feeling different. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but something had changed. As I got ready for work, a wave of nausea hit me. I barely made it to the bathroom in time. But as the days went by, the morning sickness persisted. At first, I chalked it up to stress and grief, but a small voice in the back of my mind whispered another possibility. Finally, after a week of this, I found myself standing in the pharmacy aisle, staring at pregnancy tests with trembling hands. I bought one and hurried home. The 3 minutes I waited for the result were the longest of my life. When I finally looked at the test, I saw 2 clear blue lines. I sank to the bathroom floor, a mix of emotions overwhelming me. Joy, fear, grief, hope, they all swirled together in a dizzying cocktail. Chloe? Dad's voice came through the door. Everything okay, in there? I opened the door, tears streaming down my face. Dad's expression immediately changed from concern to alarm. What's wrong, sweetie? He asked. I held up the test, my hand shaking. I'm pregnant, Dad. I fell into his arms, sobbing. He held me, stroking my hair like he used to when I was a little girl. It's okay, he murmured. It's going to be okay. You're not alone, Chloe. And this baby is a gift. A piece of Michael that will live on. His words struck a chord in me. This baby was a part of Michael, a continuation of our love. Suddenly, the fear began to recede, replaced by a fierce determination. You're right, I said, wiping my eyes. This baby is a gift, and we're going to be okay. Dad smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. That's my girl. Now, let's get you something to eat. You're eating for 2 now, after all. As we made our way to the kitchen, I felt a sense of hope blooming in my chest. Yes, the road ahead would be challenging, but with my father by my side and Michael's child growing inside me, I knew we could face anything. As my belly grew with our child, I found strength I never knew I had. Dad was my rock, always there with a kind word or a helping hand. We settled into a new routine, just the 2 of us, eagerly anticipating the arrival of the newest member of our little family. One sunny afternoon, as I was tending to the garden Dad and I had planted together, I heard a car pull up. My heart sank as I recognized Karen's sedan. What could they possibly want now? I made my way to the front of the house, one hand instinctively cradling my swollen belly. Karen and Emily stood on our porch, looking uncomfortable and slightly desperate. Chloe, Karen began, her voice lacking its usual sharpness, we need to talk to you. I raised an eyebrow but said nothing, waiting for her to continue. Emily chimed in, her eyes darting around nervously. We've hit some hard times. We were wondering if we could stay in your father's old apartment. Just until we get back on our feet. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. After everything they'd put us through, they had the audacity to ask for more. I'm sorry, I said, my voice firm but calm. That's not possible. I don't want to communicate with you anymore. Karen's eyes narrowed as they fell on my pregnant belly. Her face contorted with a mix of shock and disgust. You're pregnant, she spat. Already? You little prostitute. I can't believe you've already found a new man. Michael's body isn't even cold in the ground. I felt a surge of anger, but I pushed it down. The old Chloe might have felt the need to explain, to defend herself, to tell them that this was Michael's child. But I was no longer that person. This baby, my pregnancy, they were sacred things, too precious to be tainted by Karen's poison. I didn't want my child to have such a grandmother and aunt. Instead, I smiled a small, secretive smile that seemed to unnerve Karen even more. My personal life is none of your concern, I said calmly. Now, I think it's time for you to leave. Karen looked like she wanted to say more, but something in my expression must have stopped her. She turned on her heel, grabbing Emily's arm. I watched as they drove away, feeling a sense of peace wash over me. I had stood my ground, protected my family, and maintained my dignity. Michael would have been proud. As I turned to go back inside, I caught sight of Dad watching from the window, his expression a mix of pride and concern. You okay, sweetheart? He called as I entered. I nodded, my hand resting protectively over my belly. Better than okay, I replied, and for the first time in months, I truly meant it. Life had thrown me curveballs, losing my mother at 12, my father's disability, the cruelty of my in-laws, and the devastating loss of my beloved Michael. But standing there in the home we had created together, with my father's steadfast love and my unborn child, Michael's child, growing within me, I knew one thing for certain. We would be okay. More than okay. We would thrive. Come on, Dad, I said, wheeling him toward the kitchen. Let's make dinner. I'm starving. He chuckled, reaching up to squeeze my hand. That's my girl, he said softly. That's my strong, brave girl. And as the afternoon sun streamed through our kitchen windows, casting everything in a golden glow, I felt Michael's presence around us, warm and protective. Like he'd promised in his letter, he was still watching over us. And we would make him proud.